Hello everybody. Welcome to this webinar on the 1970 British Cohort Study at age 51. And we're very excited about the new data, and thank you so much for joining us. So I'd like to start with a bit of housekeeping. Your cameras will be switched off and mics muted. If you have any questions, please use the chat function, and please note your questions. They will be visible to all attendees. If you have any technical issues, please email us at ioe.clsevents@ucl.ac.uk. Just to let you know that we're recording the content section of this webinar, but not the actual questions. So that element will be available at a later date. And finally, your feedback is really important to us as we're continually trying to improve our training to help people understand and use the cohort data. So if you could complete the very short feedback form when at the end, a link will appear near the end of the webinar, and your views are greatly appreciated. So we'd really like that. Thank you. So here, I'm just going to introduce everyone. I've put everyone in the order you'll see them. I'm Vanessa Moulton. I'm a researcher at CLS, and I'm kicking off. Carol will follow. She's the BCS 70 survey manager, and Sam Parsons, who is also a researcher at CLS. And we'll all be presenting sections of the content. And in the last 15 minutes or so, we'll be joined by George Plebidis, who is director of the BCS 70 in the Q&A session. So the plan for today, to start, I'm going to do very briefly discuss our cohort studies and give you an overview of the BCS 70 along with some available resources. Then how to access the data and give you an overview, of what's in the BCS 70 survey at age 51. Carol will cover some methodological matters, and Sam then will look at some initial findings. And as I mentioned, we'll have a Q&A at the end. So please put your questions in the chat and we'll respond to them then. So here at the Centre for Longitudinal Studies, we have 4 core cohort studies. There's the National Child Development Study, a cohort born in 1958 in Great Britain in the same week. We also have the 1970 British Cohort Study, obviously the cohort we're interested in today, again born in 1 week in the same week in Great Britain. We then have Next Steps. They were born in 1989 to 90, and this study began when they were aged 13 to 14 and was initially run by the Department for Education and is England only. And finally, the Millennium Cohort Study, born in the UK from 2000 to 2002. So all these studies are ongoing, and this chart shows the year on the horizontal and the age on the vertical. The larger dots refer to periods of main data collection. And if we just focus on the BCS 70, so since 1970, the year of their birth, there have been 10 major data collection periods, including the age 51. And just a quick shout that we'll be collecting data again for the BCS 70 and NCDS in 2026, and there'll be some consultation, so you might see some marketing about that. So a vast amount of information has been collected about the cohort members across the life course. The content is multidisciplinary. It spans social, economic, psychological, and health. And information about the cohort members, there's information about the cohort members' parents, details on the birth, so health issues, for instance, growing up, so their circumstances, schooling, transitions from education to employment, relationships and parenthood, and then in midlife, issues relating to midlife, health, and much, much more. So I'm now going to give you a brief overview before we move into the age 51 of data collection in the 1970 British Cohort Study. So in total, there are, as I mentioned, 11 sweeps of the study currently available, including birth and the new age 51 survey. In the early sweeps of the study, the main respondents were the parents, particularly mothers. At age 16, there was rather more involvement from the cohort members themselves, who became the main respondent from age 26 onwards. The study began as the British Birth Survey, so the early focus was medical. And in all the childhood sweeps, there were medical examinations and other information was collected from schools, for instance, for example, how the children behaved at school. There's height and weight, which has been collected at most sweeps, and a biomedical sweep at age 46, which includes blood samples to extract DNA and to get measurements, biomarkers. Cohort members also sat a variety of cognitive and mental health tests in childhood and adulthood, and consent has been asked for health and economic records. Just to say that the number of participants in 1970 was around 16,500, and you can see that the number taking part at the bottom of the chart there has gradually dropped over time. But to say that we have over 8,000 who've responded to the age 51 survey, which is amazing. Yeah, so that's great. So the main survey data is also enhanced by other types of data. So for the BCS 70, we have genetic data for around 5,600 cohort members. We have linked administrative data also available. So for example, hospital episode statistics in England and Scottish medical records. And coming soon, we will have employment data in England via the UK longitudinal linkage collaboration. There's also geographical data. So this is linked from the cohort members' postcodes, for example, local area outputs, local output areas, and the Townsend Index of Deprivation. And if you're looking to conduct cross-cohort analysis, some data has been harmonized across all the cohorts, for example, socioeconomic, BMI, mental health. And soon to be available, for example, we'll have some harmonized health measures and also partnership data. So all these areas I've mentioned are key areas of the program development and expansion, and they're being added to all the time. Just one other thing, we also have COVID online surveys conducted at 3 time points, 2 in 2020 and a third in early 2021. And the surveys investigate possible impacts of the pandemic on multiple aspects of life and covered a wide range of subjects. So they're like embedded in the surveys. So where do you go for more information about the BCS 70? Well, most of what I've mentioned can be found on the CLS website, which has extensive resources and information. There's an overview of the BCS, and there's a particular page for each of the cohorts. So for the 1970 British Cohort Study, there's an overview of each study sweep, sub-studies, documentation, latest research, and it's definitely a great place to start to look for resources. There's also an introduction to the BCS 70 video available, but is now out of date with the new data, but is great for the previous sweeps. There are user guides available for most study sweeps covering fieldwork, overview of study, content data. There are also technical reports written by the external fieldwork agency, and questionnaires are available for all of the sweeps. There are also a variety of other guides, for example, on linked health administrative data sets and COVID-19, for example, and many more. And also we have a training and support page on our website where you can find previous webinars on a variety of topics, for example, introductions to the particular cohorts, methods, themes such as aging, mental health, specialist data such as genetics and admin linked health records and more. And these are also available on our YouTube channel. And on the website, you can search for upcoming events. We run a wide range of events throughout the year. Next up, we have a training event on harmonizing health data. And in early summer, a webinar on the new data available in the 1958 cohort at age 62. So how do you access this amazing data? Well, most of the cohort data is available via the UK data service.ac.uk. It's free to download for students, academics, government, analysts, and the third sector. And access for most of the data is immediate. So if you haven't already, you'll need to register, complete a few sections about yourself and what you're using the data for. And most of the data can be downloaded instantly. As we've shown, there's a wide range of data available, and it goes through a process of classification based on sensitivity and disclosure, and is grouped low, moderately, and the most sensitive and disclosive data. So most data has been classified as low level of sensitivity and disclosure, and this, as I've mentioned, you can just download straight away under the end user license, agreeing to the terms and conditions. Other data which is under special license, this is moderately disclosive. So for example, geographical indicators or mortality data. And there's also more sensitive or disclosive data which is available under secure access license. If you want to know more about those, then I suggest clicking on the link on the CLS website to have a look at the various protocols to access that data. But as I mentioned, most of the data that we're going to discuss here, and most of the data generally, is available to download straight away. So this is the page to access the new age 51 data from the UKDS. I would recommend using the serial number for the BCS 70 cohort, which is 200001. And this will help you navigate, because if you use that link there, it will bring up all the BCS 70 data and be easier to use. The serial number for the age 51 survey is 9347. And you can see here, if you go onto this page, that there are various tabs to look at documentation and resources that are available. And there you've got the purple tab on the right hand side to access your data. This is, I downloaded this data last week, and these are the data files you'll receive. There are a variety of files, and the one that's got most of the survey data is called BCS 11 _ age 51 _ main, and this contains most of the other data. The other files, they're long format files, and they focus really on specific information. So unless you're really interested in those, you probably wouldn't look at them. There's a person grid which is useful too. And for example, with the benefits file, people will go through each of the different benefits for that particular question. So it's in a long format. So when you download the data, you'll also get helpful resources. There's a user guide and questionnaires. There's a variable lookup table and a technical report. And we would strongly advise looking at the user guide as it explains the fieldwork, the questionnaire, response to the survey, the data. For example, it has identifiers in there. It also has, it advises on the derived variables, of which there are many, which are of great use. There are non-response weights, and it then discusses the non-response weights and mode effects. And much of what we'll highlight now can be found in more detail in the user guide. Okay, so let's have a look at the content of the age 51 survey. I'm going to cover a number of areas, so economic, physical health and behaviours, mental health and well-being, cognition, and highlight a few specifics and special features. However, this isn't exhaustive and is an overview to give you an idea of what's available. So for the next few slides, I'll show you what's been collected at age 51, indicated on the far right column, and on the left, previous sweeps, ages where some information was collected. So you can look, you can basically see the longitudinal nature of the data. First, I'll focus on economic activity, income and wealth. So at age 51, we capture occupation. The cohort members were asked to provide details about their current job, as well as any previous jobs they had since last interview. The cohort members with cohabiting partners were also asked to provide details about their partners' jobs as well. And these were coded to the 4-digit standard occupation coding frame for the SOC 2020, and 3 digits are included in the main data, along with other measures of a social class, for example. So we have the NSEC classes 5 and 7. And just to say that prior occupation of the parent and then the cohort member has been measured at most sweeps, and we have data on employment histories across the life course. We also asked at age 51 cohort members and partners' earnings, also income from other sources such as benefits, investments, and also inheritance. We asked about inheritance, whether they'd received an inheritance, the number, who'd received it, whether it was a cohort member or the partner or both, and if they had received it, who they received it from, the value and when. At age 51, we also capture wealth, so housing wealth, house value and mortgage, their financial wealth, so savings and debts. And we have some questions on pensions. So they were asked whether they had a pension, whether it was an employer or personal pension, if they're currently contributing, and if they're receiving the pension, and the age and the value. Also for cohabiting partners, if the partner has a pension, whether it's an employer or personal, and also again whether they're receiving it, and the age and the value. So age 51, we've captured many health measures. I'll highlight a few. So there is a measure of self-rated general health, as well as the ONS questions on long-lasting health conditions and illnesses. Also, particular medical conditions are identified. And established surveys such as the SF36 have also been asked, which is a multi-purpose health survey of 36 questions covering, for example, physical function, role limitations, energy, emotional well-being and pain. We have self-report height and weight and a range of physical activities that they take part in. There are also self-rated questions relating to health behaviours such as diet, smoking, drugs and alcohol consumption and sleep. And established scales such as the Audit PC, which measures alcohol consumption problems and dependency. There's also a section on COVID, so whether they'd had COVID, whether the vaccinations they'd had and the type, and whether they had any new conditions as a result of COVID, and also whether they'd had long COVID. A special feature of the Age 51 survey was the Oxford WebQ, which is an online dietary questionnaire, and this was completed on one random allocated weekday and one weekend day about their food and drink consumption in the previous 24 hours, 7 days following their interview, and this allows for measures of nutrient intake to be calculated. This data isn't yet deposited, but will be available later in the year. This questionnaire was also completed at age 46, and there's also an age 16 cohort members completed a dietary diary. Moving on to mental health scales. In adulthood, the primary measure in the BCS 70 is the malaise inventory, which measures psychological distress and has been measured again at age 51 using the 9-item scale. The SF36 mentioned earlier also has a general mental health measure. There's also 2 items from the GAD, which measures general anxiety disorder, and 2 items from the PHQ, which measures frequency of depressed mood and loss of interest, pleasure. As well as mental health data recorded earlier in adulthood, just to point out that there are measures of mental health in childhood and also the cohort members' parents' mental health as well. There are also measures of well-being captured at age 51. So we have the short version of the Warwick Edinburgh Mental Wellbeing Scale. We also have one item for a life satisfaction scale, and also self-efficacy was also measured at age 51 and numerous times previously, these measures. New to the BCS 70 at age 51 is loneliness. This was measured using 3 items from the UCL loneliness scale, and these were also measured in the COVID surveys. At age 51, we also have measures, 5 measures of cognition. So new to our cohorts, we have the National Adult Reading Test, and it's a test of vocabulary knowledge, and it's used as a method in clinical settings for estimating pre-morbid ability. The participant reads aloud 25 unphonetic, I can never say this, words, for example, naive, which you would know because if you read it, it would read knave. And the supposition is that the test depends on prior or knowledge because a participant must know how to pronounce the word. And you can't deploy any cognitive resources you just won't get the pronunciation right. In addition, at age 51, we repeat 4 cognitive function measures. So immediate word list recall, animal naming, letter cancellation, and delayed word list recall, which are measures of memory, executive function, and processing speed. And these were also measured at age 46. Also new to the age 51 survey were a set of questions on domestic violence. There are 5 questions on whether a partner or ex-partner has used force, harassed them, threatened them, for example, and if so, when has this happened any time in the last 12 months. Other sensitive questions include having children who died, unsuccessful pregnancies, gynecological problems and menstruation, as well as questions on political attitudes, relationships and share of household tasks. Some other question areas we'd like to highlight are we collect lifelong learning. So we collected all new types of qualifications gained, both academic and vocational. We have questions on attitudes to how much money they'll have and saving for retirement. Questions on caring responsibilities. So for a child with special needs, their partner, and also help for their parents if they're still alive. We also have the social provision scale, which measures the availability of social support. We have 20 items from the mini international personality pool, which measures 5 traits: neuroticism, extroversion, openness, agreeableness, and conscientiousness, and also some questions on social media use, so how often they use sites or apps and time spent typically in a day. And finally, in case you wanted to do some cross-cohort analysis, we wanted to show you examples of comparable measures in the BCS 70 age 51 and the 1958 cohort at age 50. There are many questions administered across the two cohorts, for example, health scales, so self-related general health, the SF36, mental health, malaise, well-being, cognition, financial circumstances, personality, care of parents and values, to name a few. And Sam will be looking at a couple of these in the initial findings. But before then, I'll pass you over to Carol, who'll be looking at some methodological matters.
Okay, so thank you very much. I'm just here to talk through the methodology that we have used in the age 51 survey. So I'd like to start by giving you a quick overview of this survey. So in total, we have data for 8,016 interviews, and that was a response rate of 65%. As you can see here, we have had a considerably long fieldwork period, and this has been due to the pandemic. The survey was originally designed to be an in-person survey, and due to the COVID pandemic, we had to make adaptations to this and introduce a video interview mode. And the pandemic also had an impact on our interviewer capacity, unfortunately, which also caused this sort of long fieldwork period. I'm going to just discuss each of the different stages in detail shortly, but I've just listed some of the key ones there. So as Vanessa's touched on, the survey includes a number of elements. So we've got cognitive assessments, as Vanessa talked through. We have a block where we ask a number of sensitive questions. We ask consent to take part in the online dietary questionnaire during the interview, and that is sent to the respondents to complete on 2 randomly allocated days after the interview. We ask consent to data linkage, and we also provide the study members with a paper questionnaire to complete. So I just want to quickly run through the different stages of the survey and the interview modes that we've used. So prior to the pandemic, we had an in-person pilot. We then had to rethink our approach when we were unable to interview in person as we had initially planned. So we then went on to test video interviewing with a very small sample, and this was a great success. So following this, we felt confident to do a soft launch in the summer of 2021 using a video-only approach. We then fully launched the survey by video only from October 2021 until it was feasible to switch to an in-person interview mode when we were able to do so from spring 2022 onwards. When we moved on to an in-person first approach, which was our ideal mode, but we also continued to offer video calls for those who requested this. We also used video call interviews for cases where we were unable to get an in-person interviewer to visit a person in that particular area. We finished field work with a mop-up survey. So this was at the end of 2023 and the beginning of 2024. So the mop-up was a shortened web survey. And this was the people who were invited to participate in the mop-up were those who we didn't get to take part in any of the previous stages. And for the first time, we also issued our immigrant sample to take part in that. That's our sample that were not living in Great Britain. Okay, I would now like to just talk through the overall fieldwork stages for this particular survey. So firstly, we issued around 12,000 cases to our pilots, our soft launch and our main stage. And these cases were all part of our target sample. There were cohort members living in GB. I'm sorry, just there's a hand that's gone up. Is there a particular question you could add to the chat, or I just want to check in case there's a problem with my screen sharing? If it's a particular question, we can hopefully come to at the end. I'll continue, but please do let me know in case there's any issues with the screen sharing.
It looks fine, Carol.
Okay, thank you. I'll continue for now, but please do post any questions into the chat. So we issued this sample, then following on from that, we sent advance mailing to our sample, and the interviewer made contact. So for those calls that took part by video, the interviewer sent them a Microsoft Teams invite. So all our video call interviews were conducted using Microsoft Teams. The interviewer also posted, if it was a video call, or provided a self-completion questionnaire to the respondents, and they either posted or provided that when they first made contact with them to book an interview. So following this, we conducted our interviews, and here I've just noted that we had the number of interviews by video, in person, and just to note here, it wasn't an official mode, but we did accommodate 29 study members who took part by telephone, as they were unable to take part in another mode. And so these main interviews also included the various elements that I mentioned earlier, such as the cognitive assessments, agreement to an online dietary questionnaire, data linkage consent. But I just wanted to point out that we did have 6,801 people take part in the sensitive questions section. So if a study member was taking part by video, this was sent to them as a short web survey to be completed ideally during the interview itself. The video interviewer would wait while they completed it, but if they weren't able to do it at the time of the interview, they could complete it after. If it was a face-to-face call, it was completed by computer-assisted self-interviewing. This is where the interviewer will hand over their laptop to the respondent to enter the responses directly. And for any issues in either of these circumstances, the interviewer was able to help by either showing their screen or reading the questions if this was necessary. I just wanted to also note that we had 5,972 paper questionnaires returned. So for video, in a video mode, these were posted back to us. If it was a face-to-face interview, the interviewer would collect them at the end of the interview. So following on from this, the pilots in the main stage, we issued any of those who didn't take part. We asked them, but for some reason we weren't able to get them to take part in this stage. We then invited them to take part in our mop-up survey. We then, for the first time, also invited 474 cohort members who we knew to be living outside of Great Britain. These are our immigrant cases, and these were issued to the mop-up. And from that, you can see we completed a number of web. From this we sent an advance mailing, and then we completed 677 web interviews. So this slide summarises very much what I've already said. So the interview was considerably longer for the main stage and the pilots. It was around an average of 80 minutes long. We included partial cases, and the interview could also be conducted with a proxy if necessary. And these stages, I just wanted to highlight, included all the elements that we've already mentioned. What they didn't include was the immigrant cases at this point. They were only issued to the mop-up phase. I also wanted to highlight that there were some adaptations made to the questionnaire between the stages, so between the pilot, the soft launch, and the main stage. But the data has been merged to include all the stages. So if, for example, a question was dropped between the pilot and the main stage, you will be able to see this in the data. There is a code that we use, which has not asked at fieldwork stage. So you'll be able to see that when you look at the data. For the mop-up interview, just to highlight here, this was considerably shorter. It was administered by web, so it was 25 minutes long. Partial interviews were also included, but it did not include many of the elements I've already mentioned. We did have a few sensitive questions, which we included in the mop-up, and we did have a few paper questionnaires which were returned. So these were actually cases that were first invited to take part in the main stage, but didn't take part for whatever reason at that stage, but they still did actually return their questionnaire. So we have kept these and they're included in the data. Again, the data from this stage of this questionnaire has been merged in with the main stage and pilot data. Here I just wanted to quickly show you how we've maximised our number of interviews achieved by merging in all these different stages to get to the 8016 interviews, 8,016 interviews in total. I also briefly wanted to just touch on the mop-up response. So overall, 16%. As you can see, we had a higher response rate from our immigrant sample, which is not necessarily surprising. This was the first time they were invited to take part, but it's just a small number of our overall interviews at 227. Here I just wanted to show you a breakdown of the different modes of completion and the number of people taking part in this way. As I've been discussing, the Age 51 survey was carried out using a mixed mode design, and there is some difference in using different modes which may influence responses between modes, and this is known as mode effects. However, there can also be mode selection, which is a difference in responses between mode due to who is responding to each mode. And if you want more detail about this and how to handle mode effects, please refer to the Age 51 user guide for in-depth detail. You can also look at the handling mode effects in the CLS cohort studies, and this screenshot is there to have a look at. There's also a webinar video coming very soon. So very briefly, accounting for survey mode is only necessary when response differences are a result of mode effects, that is measurement error. And to understand if this is the case, we can explore non-random allocation to survey mode by specific characteristics. And to do this, we use statistical adjustment. So here's an example. We first examine whether mode differences exist by separately regressing 5 variables. There's employment, poor self-rated health, psychological distress, obesity and house ownership, and income, which is not actually shown on this chart here, but please do refer to the user guide. We do this in a variable indicating mode, whether it's video or in-person interview. And the results are indicated by the red line. And you can see to the right of the centre line, those conducting a video interview were more likely to be employed or own their own home and have higher income, while those on the left of the line, those taking part in person, were more likely to report poor health, psychological distress and obesity. We then adjust the models on a large number of factors measured across a live course. And the results indicated by the blue lines, you can see that these differences in the models are now no longer significant. They have disappeared, suggesting the difference in reporting are more likely selection effects rather than mode effects. So now moving on to response to the survey. So in longitudinal surveys, attrition is a fact. It's not just in the cohorts. It will happen regardless of any procedures to minimise it. But here at CLS, we work very hard at encouraging our cohort members to take part in the study. And in BCS 70, the original sample was around 16,500 at birth. And since the age 34, we've achieved a sample of between 8,000 to 9,000 study members. So with missing data, there is potential for bias, as respondents are often systematically different from non-respondents. So there are a number of ways to deal with non-response to surveys. In BCS 70, we use the rich data cohort members have provided across the live course to help restore sample representativeness. So one approach is non-response weights, which I'll come back to. Other approaches can be used, such as multiple imputation. And further advice on dealing with missing data can be found at the link provided that you can see on the screen. And there's also a handling missing data user guide and a webinar for further information. So in the BCS 70 at age 51, non-response weights have been included in the main file. And our target population is individuals born in a week in 1970 and at the start of the fieldwork were alive and living in Great Britain. And responses conditioned on a set of covariates informed from the CLS missing data strategy. And here you can see below the names of the weights that are within the data, but please do refer to chapter 8 of the Age 51 user guide for more information. So this example shows the effectiveness of the derived non-response weights in restoring sample representativeness. And here we look at the sample means of 2 variables, birth weight and vocabulary at age 5, and the full sample of age 51 respondents. We show that the target population, the unweighted data at age 51, and the data applying the non-response weights. For both birth weight and vocabulary, there is a considerable bias in the results of the unweighted data. However, when we use the non-response weights, this is clearly reduced. Okay, thank you very much. I've come to the end now. So now I'm going to pass on to Sam to take you through some initial findings.
Okay, thanks, Carol, and hi, everyone. So I'm going to take you through some initial findings from the age 51 survey and draw some comparisons with the 1958 study members when they were 50. So we focused on a range of outcomes to show the breadth of information that is available in the data, looking specifically at what aspects of life are the most important to study members, their physical health and mental well-being, economic activity and hours worked, and division of labour across domestic tasks. So I'm going to show descriptive statistics that are weighted to account for attrition and item non-response, and will highlight differences by sex and household income levels. So first off, what is most important? So study members were asked to rate the importance of each of these items from 1 to 10, with 10 indicating it is of highest importance. We can see that health is viewed as the most important, with an average score of 9.3, and money as the least important, with an average score of 6.1. The same pattern is observed for men and women, and largely across the different income groups. The main difference was observed for home ownership, which has increased importance for those in top income quintile households and less importance for those in the bottom households. Given the importance attached to health, we look at their physical health across 3 separate measures. Firstly, self-reported general health, dichotomized to compare those with excellent, very good, or average health versus those with fair or poor health. And then we report on proportions who are obese and have diabetes. So overall, 1 in 4 study members rated their general health as being fair or poor, with this being very similar for men or women. However, there were notable differences by income, with those in the bottom income quintile being more than 5 times as likely to report poor health as those in the top income quintile. We can see here that we observe a very, very similar pattern for the 1958 cohort. Obesity was lowest at 1 in 4 amongst the top income households, compared to around 1 in 3 in both the bottom and middle income groups. Compared to 50-year-olds born in 1958, a higher proportion of the 70 cohort were obese, a third compared to a quarter. This increase was apparent for both men and women and across income groups, but higher obesity levels were most apparent for women, with the increase going to 33% from 25% in the older cohort. So now moving on to diabetes, here we see that 1 in 12 or 8% of all 1970 study members were diabetic, with differences being most apparent by household income. 3 times as many of those in the lowest income households being diabetic compared to top income households. Again, we compared to 50-year-olds born in 1958, and we can see a higher proportion in the 70 cohort report diabetes across all groups, with the increase being most notable in low income households, increasing to 12% from 8%. So we now look at mental health. And here we concentrate on one item, the 9-question malaise inventory, which has a score range of 0 to 9, with a yes response to any of the questions included on the screen, scoring 1. A score of 4 or more indicates a high number of symptoms associated with psychological distress. Here we can see that 1 in 5 or 20% had a high number of symptoms associated with distress, which increased to 1 in 4 for women and decreased to 1 in 7 or 15% for men. Differences by income were once again stark, with 4 times as many in the lowest compared to the highest income households having symptoms associated with psychological distress. So that's 37% compared to 9. In the 58 cohort, we can see that a lower percentage of 50-year-olds had a high number of symptoms associated with distress across all groups, with this difference across cohorts being most apparent for women, increasing to 25% in the 70 from 20% in the 58 cohort. A similar pattern across income groups was observed in both cohorts, with 4 times as many in the lowest compared to the highest income quintile, again showing signs of psychological distress. We now turn to economic activity and hours worked. Looking first at economic activity, we can see that 84% of study members were economically active at age 51, with this being slightly higher amongst men than women. And we can see that this pattern is remarkably similar to 50-year-olds in the 58 cohort. Looking into economic activity in more detail for the 70 cohort, you see that differences between men and women were particularly marked when comparing those working full-time and part-time. More than 80% of men work full-time compared to 50% of women, whereas nearly 1 in 3 women work part-time compared to no more than 1 in 20 or just 5% of men. When looking at differences by household income levels, we see that more than 9 in 10 study members in top and middle income households were economically active, with less than 1% of each group being unemployed. However, among the bottom 20% of income households, not only had economic activity levels reduced to around half, specifically 51%, but unemployment at 13% made up a much larger component of their economic activity. The disadvantage experienced by low-income households is also apparent when looking at proportions out of work due to sickness or disability. Overall, 8% of 1970 study members were sick, but this was largely concentrated amongst those in the lowest income households, where more than 1 in 4 were sick compared to just 3% in middle income households and less than 1% in high income households. For those employed or self-employed, 1970 study members worked on average 37.5 hours per week, with this increasing to 41.7 for men and reducing to 33.4 hours for women. Compared to the 58 cohort, we can see that the average hours worked per week was nearly identical for men, but women in the more recent 70 cohort worked on average 3 hours more. So finally, we're going to take a look at the division of domestic tasks. Across a range of domestic tasks, study members with a partner were asked to report whether I do most of it, my partner does most of it, or whether a task was shared equally. So concentrating on the percentages reporting I do most of it, here we see that despite women in the 70 cohort working more hours and men the same hours as their counterparts 12 years earlier, the division of domestic chores in the home has remained firmly women's work. More than half of women report I do most of it in respect of cooking, shopping, cleaning and doing the laundry, compared to no more than 1 in 5 men for cooking and shopping and less than 1 in 10 for cleaning or the laundry. And for these tasks, men were more likely than women to report that these were shared equally. However, the traditional divide for doing household repairs, DIY or decorating tasks was also very evident, with 3/4 of men and just 1 in 10 women reporting I do most of it. And in this instance, it was women who were more likely to report that these tasks were shared equally. In the earlier generation, the 58 cohort, the domestic divide was even wider, with, for example, 77% of women reporting I do most of it for laundry, compared to just 5% of men, and 67% to 6% for cleaning. So that although the gap has reduced slightly in the more recent 70 cohort, domestic tasks remain overwhelmingly women's work. And so to summarise these findings, when asked to rate the importance of different aspects of their life, having good health mattered the most and money mattered the least. However, the established link between low-income households and disadvantaged outcomes was clear to see. Poor physical health is more prominent in low-income households in both generations, but levels of obesity and diabetes have increased in the 70 cohort, and most of all among low-income households. Levels of psychological distress has also increased in the 70 cohort, particularly among women, with levels of psychological distress being 4 times higher in low-income households in both generations. In terms of economic activity, levels in the 70 cohort were very similar to those to 50-year-olds in the 58 cohort. However, when we focused on the 70 cohort, cohort members in bottom income households were far less likely to be economically active, experiencing higher rates of unemployment or being out of work due to poor health. Women in the 70 cohort worked 3 hours more per week than women in the 58 cohort did at 50, but domestic tasks remain firmly within women's domain. Okay, thank you. That's the end of the presentation on initial findings. So we'll go to the Q&A.